intuition is a tricky thing because you definitely have to sharpen it. If your intuition on how a song should flow, and maybe not even a song, a conversation, anything that surrounds the artistic process and getting a record done the way like that is going to serve that song the best. If you don't get okay at it, at least by the like 100th time you do it and you're sharpening that blade, like it takes 200, 300, 400 sessions to really be like, okay, I knew I trusted myself, but I really trust myself. You could disagree with my decision, but this is how I feel, and the confidence that comes to say that.
Rory brought over a nice Beaujolais tonight. We usually drink white wines, but tonight there was a Beaujolais, and it was fantastic.
How's that faring for you?
I'll be fine. A glass is fine.
Famous last words. I'll be fine.
Have you guys met Michael in real life?
I met you at probably the last in-person conversation.
You did.
Right on, yeah.
Sick. That's right, you were here.
You came and left before the conversation. You ate my food and left.
You told me that was cool.
I know.
What is that? That's just the consumption? What is that? What do you call that? Yeah. Just pure food.
It's just a bang.
Yeah.
No. It was welcome.
We had a name for it.
Supper and conversation.
Yeah.
For the humans out there that don't know who you are, we have OjiVolta joining us from Hollywood. I had to drive out there today to drop off a microphone, and I hated every bit of the drive out there and back. But I did get espresso at my favorite San Francisco roaster called Cyclass that just opened up down in that region. So I had a nice shot of espresso, walked around the block for a second, and drove back home in a ton of traffic. But again, for those who don't know who you guys are, can you give us a quick 3 to 5 minute potted bio? One of you, both of you, step on each other's toes, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. I'm Raul. He's Mark.
Hi.
We go by OjiVolta. Thank you so much for having us.
Woo.
Yeah, thanks, y'all.
Fans, big fans. I mean, the really short version is we met in New York while working on the John Legend album, Love in the Future, and I was kind of an intern, engineer, kind of, fill in where you need. And Mark was just doing everything. And we were kind of the young guns there and started working just off of meeting each other and feeling each other's vibe. And that quickly turned into us working on almost everything together, within almost months.
Yeah, very quickly.
And that was kind of the end of our New York run. It was kind of drying up there. What 2000?
13, 2012, 13.
The scene, just everybody had started moving to LA, elsewhere. And I was still there for a bit. Mark moved out to LA, and I would crash on his couch every once in a while, just, trying to see what the LA situation had to offer. It's just, same story that everybody has. You went on a one-way. Eventually, you had just enough of an opportunity to eat and stay.
Yep.
So it's we kept working together, and that's the really short version of our story.
Well, did you hailed from Miami? Is that correct? Originally,
Puerto Rico. Yeah,
Puerto Rico originally. Yes.
I took a trip up the East Coast. It was Puerto Rico, Miami, childhood, and then New York for school.
Yeah,
which was kind of worth it, kind of not.
Yeah. Wait, do you want to elaborate on that early on in this?
No. Ultimately, a great situation. It's just all right, I'll go a little bit more before Mark
please
tells his side. But I was very engineer focused for a while there. I was working ever since I was 16 years old at a studio in Miami Beach which doesn't exist anymore. It was called South Beach Studios in this legendary hotel.
Ooh, baby.
Yeah, it was heyday, Timbo,
totally.
Scott Storch, Neptunes, etc. So I got to see the tail end of that era. And then the A room had Tom Lord Alge mixing in it. So it's
right.
hip hop B room, and then all the and a tail end of the pop punk rock era, Good Charlotte and what was that? What's that, man? I'm forgetting. Panic and all that.
Yeah, sure.
insert random emo band here.
yeah. I mean, it's like all that, like glory days for that. And so that was just kind of like the crash course in everything audio. And then I saw Pharrell and everybody in the B room. And I was like, whoa, I want to do that. That looks way more interesting to me. Like, how can I exist in the middle of these two worlds? And that's how I ended up in New York, because my parents were like, all right, cool, go to school or like get lost.
Yep.
And where did you go to school? That was engineering
at
school?
NYU at the Clive Davis Institute.
So you continued on the sort of engineering path?
Sort of. It's like, it's kind of you get to choose your own adventure. And I took like all kinds of courses, and it was just kind of like, how do I design a course load that still lets me exist like professionally? And you know, it's like the story of my life up to that point. It's like, how can I skate through the situation to do what I actually want to do?
Yeah. I have to just interject there and say that I wanted to go to the Clive Davis School of Recording Arts, and I got accepted to the Clive Davis Recording School, but not to NYU because my GPA wasn't high enough. So I clearly, made the wrong decision.
It worked out.
But I wanted to go there. It was actually at the time one of the I would say the most state-of-the-art usable studio in a college.
The facilities were insane.
Insane. It was actually, it seemed inspiring, and they offered you use of the board, the console, and the studio facilities early on, versus the audio school I went to. Like, you couldn't touch an SSL till the fourth year, and I was like, what? Drop out and like bought Pro Tools.
Where did you go?
I went to Five Towns College. It's an audio recording school in Long Island.
You know some people from there, yeah.
Yeah, and then interned at Cove City, where y'all just made a record, which is just a crazy, full circle where like people are making records again out of that studio. And to me, that place was when I was there, was all dried up, and I couldn't wait to get out. But I had such a fundamental learning experience there, like watching all different genres, like from Dream Theater to like Billy Joel records to really bad rap. Like there was nothing but like Alicia Keys was in there, and like all these things. It was a cool learning experience of diversity. Anyway, we have more Long Island and New York camaraderie than I guess we realized until recently.
Yeah, I love Cove City. I love that place.
Yeah,
that's so wild that people love it. And what's wild to me is they had these weird looking speakers on the console, and they had PMC on the front, and I was like, why do they have flat cones? This is weird. Fuck these speakers. And I hated them. They were like the AML ones or something. There's OG PMC speakers, and now I'm like PMC rep.
Yeah.
But they were the first speakers.
Excited.
Yeah. Are they still on the console? Do they have those gray ones?
We made them put them on.
Yeah, they were intense. I didn't understand them because I was using Genelec and NS10s at the time. I didn't understand those speakers. Anyway, I'm glad you guys are working there. That's where I learned. That's OG for me for a few years.
Definitely a magical place.
Yeah.
But I guess while I was doing all that, Mark was. You want to tell him like?
I mean, I grew
Your whole
up.
life story.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, but just always played a lot of music my whole life, and ended up in New York because it's just like an hour and 10-minute drive away. So I was going into the city like starting at 15, just trying to make music in any way possible, playing with bands and stuff like that, and ended up just kind of meeting somebody who was working on the John Legend project, made a bunch of tunes with them, and a few months later found myself in Kanye's basement there, working on stuff, and signed like a publishing deal. 2-3 weeks after that, I had zero idea even like what a publishing deal was or like what publishing meant and all that stuff. I was like, you want to give me money like for songs that I've potentially like gonna come out? Like, great. Whatever. And just kept working on that, and met Volta, and New York was awesome, but all the trips I was making to LA through my publishing company were just like always incredibly productive and like super inspiring. So I ended up making the move out here, and Volta.
I told them to get a really nice couch for me.
Yeah. What was the time frame between the signing of the publishing deal and the release of the first record that you worked on that potentially got you that publishing deal?
I think like maybe 2 years or like so it's like something crazy. Like that album definitely was like, I don't know, like a 3-year process or something. I probably had other songs come out actually before that, but it was definitely a minute. But
another parallel, I also got a publishing deal based on pending potential releases that are still on a hard drive. Raul got to hear a couple of them.
They're so good.
And they'll never, ever come out for this artist that will remain nameless. And somehow I got a pub deal off of Potential Records, and now I just mix. So thanks for that check, y'all. Got me the gift shop started up, which is totally...
Hype goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great point. I mean, it does. And just kind of understanding, though, I mean, even your trajectory, though common, right? There was that drive from Mark, kind of to see what it's like out here. You know, I'm assuming you guys feel like the city has given you what you thought it represented. I mean, you're still here. You've both made it here, and you know, how do you feel about what this city has given you? I mean, we talk a lot about this on the podcast of like, well, what is a city offering you in a digital age where you can work kind of anywhere? You know, what's your relationship to LA at this point?
Well, it's like you have your preconceived notion of like most things before you do them, right? And you know, coming from Miami, I kind of had this, you know, Hollywood sort of, okay, similar to Miami Beach. You know, I can sort of expect that, and it's not that at all. Right. And so you sort of, all right, arrive to a place, and if it's very different to your preconceived notion, you have to kind of adjust while you're trying to survive, which is like two things at once. It's like, all right, this isn't the place I thought it was going to be, where I guess, you know, New York is more of like, all right, I'm going to go visit New York, whatever. I already knew what I was getting into. And you're trying to work and figure out where you belong in this city while trying to figure out the city at the same time.
For me, I feel like New York was definitely hyper romanticized, you know, by like people like the generation beyond mine, who actually were there like when New York was like an amazing place for creatives. So I had New York painted in my mind as this like utopia for creatives, where you know, when I actually like got there and was living there, I guess this would have been like what, 2008 that I got my first apartment there. You know, I quickly realized that like anybody who was like an aspiring creative was just like nonstop working in order to pay their like $2,000 rent, and had very little time to actually spend like working on their craft. And LA seemed to be very different, just in terms of like being a place that you could like move to and not like have to like have like a serious paying job already to like survive, which was definitely a bit of a transition though for me in moving here as well, because on the East Coast I was doing like really, really steady session work, you know, and that was its like own like stream of income. So moving out here kind of forced me to like, I'm strictly like producing.
What were you doing session work as? Keyboardist?
Everything.
Keyboardist,
bass, guitar.
Sick.
I mean, it was, you know, just
Does
like,
it make noise?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It was this sort of like figuring that like footing out in the beginning and getting in where we could. It was like the very beginning of
this is like over a decade ago for me.
It's so crazy, but it's like, you know, it was reshaping the expectation and then realizing, okay, this is how I can start moving here and survive. And early on, I made a really like severe decision that I didn't want to engineer. I didn't, I didn't want to mix like whatever I could get my hands on, even if it was remote, in any sense. I wanted to produce and write. So it was just kind of a ticking time bomb of the savings that I had and whatever, production gigs that we could get that would pay just enough to survive. But it was really that decision to put a crazy amount of pressure to be like, all right, I need to get a pub deal to survive, because that was kind of the option, right? It wasn't, we didn't have a built-in network of artists or anything that could keep the lights on, or like a steady gig or an album situation where you can kind of like write things off, throw things into the mix. But it was really just like, all right, cool. Taking, like, I had X amount of dollars. It was going to last me like 2 or 3 months. Like, make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine this is common for a lot of people listening to this, and that will listen to it and will try to emulate your journey in a sense too. I mean, I can't imagine any other way.
One of the most impactful things that somebody said to me, like early on, I had to have been like 18 or 19, like right after I signed like my publishing deal. Like I met with all the people at the company, and the one person was like, yeah, so like obviously like you can chase like whatever fad or whatever trend is happening in music, but know that if you stay true to what you do and what you love, there will be a point at which what you do is valuable. It's just a matter of when, and like the timing of how that like happens culturally. And that was something that definitely kind of like got me through some of that early phase where it's like, all right, like, like you really have an uphill battle like early on with like even getting in the room with people. So just like knowing that like you're good at what you do, and eventually like if you strive to make it happen, like you'll find a crack and like make your way through.
Yeah.
Shout out Carrie Ann Marshall. That was
shout out.
Yeah, she's
I was just
awesome.
about to say, who is that, and are you still in touch with this human? Because that seems like a pretty pivotal moment in the
Actually,
the
I
creative journey.
am. So she was over at Songs at the time, but now she's at Warner Chapel, which is where I am currently at as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's cool.
Full circle moment.
All the family over there. Katie Walliver too.
I wanted to ask you guys, whenever that was 10 years ago at the airport, you're coming out of LAX from New York, a little bit greener than you are now, and you could say one thing. You could dress up in disguise as 21 Mark and Raoul and go and meet yourselves and say one thing to help orientate yourselves or help or guide or inspire. What would be, even if it's a practical nugget, like don't fuck Logic, use Pro Tools, or like what, like don't work with this guy, work with that guy, or, don't spend all your publishing deal on whatever, what would you, is there anything that comes to mind as sort of a pivotal thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a cliche, but it's like you're running your own race, right? It's easy to look to the side and see everybody else, or so and so was popping already by the time they were this age, or this is the type of song that's popping right now. Let me make it. Let me make music like that, right? So I didn't have the luxury of hearing that, and maybe I did, right? There's also the thing that it's like, you can hear advice, but are you listening? And that happens to me. That happens to me all the time. Where so and so said that already, and I had to go through that learning experience to be like, yeah, they were right. But yeah, run your own race, and it, like, if you are diligent and you are actually good at what you're doing, don't worry, because you're gonna be networking. You're gonna be going for the gig. You're gonna be doing your best job. Like, don't worry. The lights are gonna be on next month. You will find a way to keep the lights on. It's a very like the stability thing, at least for me, and I know for a lot of creatives, is important, because you need to be some sort of stable to create, unless your whole thing is that you don't want stability to create.
Well, you want to rid yourself of ambient anxieties and those underlying fears to be able to open up fully. Yeah.
Especially as producers, right? Like I think one of the things that you get called upon and you build trust on is your consistency, right? So you can be an amazing producer, beat maker, artist, and burn out really like hot and fast, right? But if you want to have longevity, there's got to be some sort of balance, and the stability factor, at least for me, is important in being able to sustain like a long run, be like consistent in our work.
Yeah.
And it's like hopefully what will start happening.
No, I mean it is happening. I mean, I relate to that highly. I think that's why I get hired is for consistency, and people can expect a certain level of output when they come, and that's why there's continuous hiring. It's not for some fad. And I learned that from Tony. I mean, as a mentor, it's like that's what I learned most from him is the importance of stability and consistency, and that's what people are coming for. So I mean, I hear that in your guys' work. There's this extreme consistent, unique left of center pocket and bounce and groove, but a nice enough sparkle and shine to things. So it competes but it always has something a little left that's clearly your own race. It's your joint race. I mean, I don't know whose own race it's coming from, to use your own words, but it's a joint race as a partnership.
Definitely. What would you have told yourself, Mark, when you arrived?
I guess for me, the kind of transition into music as a career was a very blurry thing because it was something I loved to do my whole life and found ways to make money doing, like as young as like 10. Like I was like playing at like local coffee shops, and like then by 11 I was playing like 3 gigs like weekly at resorts, like making like a couple $100 like a week as like an 11-12-year-old kid, playing like cocktail hour at like weddings and shit.
Sounds
like
illegal.
that. Yeah, no, like 100%. Like I don't even know like where like they make tuxes that small, but I had one like, but yeah. So
I had one.
in going into production, I guess I kind of like would have like advised myself to really treat it as like a business, not only for business reasons but for creative reasons as well, because ultimately like anything that you're working on needs to be true to itself, whatever that thing is. And I feel like in my youth, I was always trying to find where like I as a creative would see myself in something that I was working on, as opposed to just like doing whatever we were working on, like the proper service of letting it be. So that sort of like distinction and kind of thinking in that way, because ultimately what we're doing is still in the service industry. Like we're called upon to be creative on the behalf of other people or in parallel with other people, when you're working with artists. So like, you're working to use your creative perspective to help the team meet the end goal. So, like really like having the blinders on that finish line, I feel like is important, and something that it took me a little bit to learn.
That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, it's making me think of something that I've never known who the right person to ask this question is, but I guess you're probably the ones. What did you think about the SoundCloud movement when Produced By became such a popular credit? And like you're all of a sudden the artist then. Like you're all of a sudden part of the artistry. And what you just said there is the opposite of that. And it's always been a conundrum in my brain.
Well, I mean, that's like its own sort of thing, because ultimately in a lot of genres, the producers are driving the creative aesthetic. They might not be always the lyricists or the songwriters, but you know, it's very much so you're making the box, the marketing plan, and all that stuff for the action figure, even though you might not be the action figure yourself. Like, and you know, so you really have to like create like an actual like sound and aesthetic. And if like artists are able to be like transient creatively, where they can like hop from sound to sound, which is a luxury like a lot of rappers and a lot of pop artists as well kind of have. Like, you know, the idea of the super producer album, it doesn't need to sound like a singular body of work. You know, if you got like hot beats, you got hot beats, like put your name on that shit, own it. Like it's great for like visibility and marketing. It's great for business.
But it sounds like you're when you're talking about seeing yourself in the work and being concerned with how you're sort of positioned in the work, that seems like almost at like the image level, like what the song projects, and how it, you know, that work sort of speaks for you. In a way, it sounds like you're talking now, you're saying when you're collaborating with other people, you're depersonalizing from the work, and you're sort of looking at a song or a thing that has a life of its own, and you're getting yourself out of the way to be, you know, part of a collaboration. Is that a fair way to?
I think about it like, you know, sometimes you can see something great in a collaborator, an artist, in a song that maybe already exists, right? And you're called upon to produce it, or you co-write it, etc. And you have certain tendencies and certain, I guess, preferences, right? Different tastes that will lead to decisions that will make it more yours than what it has to be.
Or even the muscle memory of the chords you by default go to play, because that's just like what feels comfortable. You know, making creative decisions, not necessarily out of like muscle memory type instinct, but like actual like
what serves the soul of that piece of work best, right? And it's like, you know, it's impossible to remove yourself from it fully. You're doing it, right? You're like a summation of everything you've experienced, listened to, done, etc. But I think it's very telling that, right, you know, producers, artists, writers go on runs, right? They're hot for like 2 or 3 years, or, you know, sometimes longer, which is very few people, but with a particular sound, right? And it's like, yeah, we might have certain tendencies, and maybe we do have a sound, right? But how do you go from doing polar opposites in terms of projects without compromising them?
Going back to what you said, Mark, we're at the airport. Basically, you're saying this isn't about you, bro. You're serve the song, serve the client, serve the people you're working with, right? And then you sort of disappear into the crowd, and the 2010 Mark is blown away by this wisdom, right? But you gotta. I'm seeing the movie. It's a vignette, right? But you've gotta do that. So what I'm wondering is, you said serve the what did you say? The end goal of the record, and at some point you guys need to know what that is. So from that record that John just described to, you know, the JP Sachs record, to the stuff you've done with John Bellion, it's not the same. Clearly, the goal is not the same. The context is not the same. But there must be a process, and it of course it doesn't always have to be the same process, of finding what the goal is. You know, knowing it, intuiting it, learning it, being told it. What does that look like when you say, you know, support the goal? How do you know what it is? I'm thinking as a kid, you know.
It's all of those things. It's
right.
Literally like you have to adapt to every situation. You know, and really that, you know, for me, like coming from playing jazz, like, you know, improvised music is all about stream of consciousness, which is definitely like a lot of muscle memory. So like really like taking a more cerebral approach like from a creative level with certain things where it's not like, oh, like what do I want to hear, but like what needs to actually be done. The way that ends up getting presented, it can be like a demo that somebody shows you that you're like, yo, this should be the vibe, and we expand upon it in this way. It can be like,
References.
yo, like I already put my first album out, it sounds like this, like I want to like change in this way, but like retain this stuff, like, you know, like every situation is different. You're dealing with new artists, you're dealing with established artists, you're dealing with artists who might not write much at all to people who are writing and producing a lot of it themselves. So like you just kind of have to like figure out where, like, what you can contribute in a positive level on an actual like tangible work level, and then what you can contribute on a, you know, kind of just like vision level. You know,
sometimes the best thing you can do is not do anything and kind of, you know, put the blinders on or set barricades into the street that you shouldn't be going down, you know.
What does Rick Rubin call himself? The greatest reducer of all time?
That took a while, and you said a particular word I think is poignant, is intuit, right? It's like that. I think intuition is a tricky thing because you definitely have to sharpen it. If your intuition on how a song should flow, and maybe not even a song, a conversation, anything that surrounds the artistic process and getting a record done the way like that is going to serve that song the best. If you don't get okay at it, at least by the like 100th time you do it and you're sharpening that blade, like it takes 200, 300, 400 sessions to really be like, okay, I knew I trusted myself, but I really trust myself. You could disagree with my decision, but this is how I feel, and the confidence that comes to say that.
What's your relationship with the ideas versus the filtration of ideas? Like, as creatives, there's, you know, if you don't have a ton of ideas, then you're arguably not that creative. But how do you know when an idea is worth leaving, adding? You know, what's the relationship to the filtering aspect, and how do you sharpen that skill?
People say there's no such thing as like bad ideas. It's like, no, that's not true.
That's not true at all. Yeah.
The best thing to know, I typically don't say the idea the second I think about it, right? I might have an idea. I let it sit for a while, because there's typically not really a rush when you're in the songwriting or creative process, right? Or at least if that's the case, we don't really operate in that world. Sure. Let it simmer in your head a little bit. Let people talk. Let people sing melodies. If it still feels like a good idea, at least for me, in like 5 minutes, even 3 minutes later, try to figure out a way to drop the idea without it being like a big moment.
Yeah, I mean, I like,
you know, it's not like, oh, I have an idea.
Oh my God, yeah, vibe kill.
Yeah.
I would say 90% of, you know, the top line contributions that I have like come from me, like as somebody else is saying something, just being like, like just like some random thing. Like, you know, I'm not good with lyrics at all, but it'll just be like, oh, here's a random flow that I'm humming that somebody else who can actually sing latched onto and like went with, and there is our hook.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, so it's just kind of like planting seeds, like, you know, pulling up like the right sound at the right time, like, you know, like just kind of like reading the room. I mean, that's really the creative process is all about like adapting, and it's kind of like you're dropped at the center of a maze and you got to find your way out. And after a while, you realize more than anything where to not go. You know, and that helps you, like make it to the end, because like slowly you're like, all right, well, we're not gonna go there, without like being creatively stifling.
And without imposing rules.
It actually gives you more freedom to have good guidelines. Otherwise, it could be anything, right? It's a sort of tyranny of choice.
Yeah. During the creative process, like what we were talking about, it's like, how do you say no without saying no and continue the ball rolling? And it's either A, having a comfortable enough relationship with whoever you're working with where you can say no and they're genuinely not going to be offended by it, because you can still be really close to somebody and say no and they'll be really upset on the inside.
Of course.
Everybody wants to have their like ideas like respected, and like therefore if they have a something they want to try, they want to have that idea entertained. So in COVID Zoom sending only times, it's maybe a little bit different, because it's like, all right, like cool, tried it over here, didn't like it, not gonna bounce it and send it to you,
right?
But if you're still like in the room for the project, you can't like be shutting things down like that. It's just not, it's not a vibe creatively at all. But as far as like when we're there like finishing stuff, I feel like we kind of have our own like unspoken threshold for just like quality of certain things, like sonics, and like this is our threshold for like things being too cluttered. This is our threshold for things sounding too lazy and basic that we've just kind of like found over the years, because it's kind of like a lot of what we do will be like passing things back and forth, which to me is super valuable, because every time somebody else does something to an idea that you have, it makes you see it from a different perspective.
Oh yeah.
I'm thinking of a young producer, writer, thinking about, we're told you've got to sell your idea, make people notice it, own it, make sure that it gets heard. And you're saying the exact opposite, which I love, which is just sneak it in there and sort of, and if it's good, it'll catch. And Mark is saying the same thing in a different way, which is genuine creative enthusiasm, just riffing, being excited, like singing. So often, I mean, I remember as a recording engineer, you're listening to you're listening to playback, and you do a harmony, and the artist is like, "What's that?" It's like, well, it's and then that's the harmony.
That's what I mean. The saying of the idea isn't the thing. Everyone in the room needs to hear it.
Yes,
to all agree that yes.
But I'm fascinated by this undersell that Raul is using, which is just kind of waiting. Instead of I got this, I know what we need, and then waiting and then slipping it in this low key way and trusting that if it's good, it will. Well, I think that's what you meant.
That's what I mean. When people hear it, that's when it's not about the saying of it.
Yes. Yeah, that's
it makes me think of when we were working with Tony and the 10-minute rule came up, and like we'd have a lull and he'd pause the record, he'd like go grab a glass of scotch or something and just walk around the room, and I would finally speak up, because I'd try not to like overspeak in Tony's room. I'd be like, yo, what if on the snare drum in the bridge, like we did some crazy delay or just make it trippy? And he'd be like, you go do it. And then he'd be like, you got 10 minutes, sell me on the idea in a minute. And if we like the idea in a minute, you got 9 more. It's like, do it, just show it. And if you have this kind of open door creative policy in the room with collaborators, and that's kind of, you're invested in the want for it to work out and succeed, that seems to empower people to do their best. So he had that in the room, which, has inspired me to always like hear out every idea. It's just like when you're in the room with 4 people, sometimes, 4 times 100 ideas, that's a shitload of ideas.
And then it ends up a debate. You're debating for 3 minutes when you can just have heard it already 3 different ways.
Exactly.
Like, what are we doing?
So I always like that 10-minute rule, and I have a hourglass that's 10 minutes on my side table. I got Tony one, or did we get Tony one as a joint? Like when we kind of like left the studio, as kind of a
So do you do that with yourself? Like, oh, I have this like, because that's for all intents and purposes, like extra mix, like kind of move, right?
Yep.
When you're given a record to mix, like people typically want you to like make it sound good, and the second you start adding delays and stuff like that, do you put the hourglass on yourself?
I haven't in a while.
It's ingrained.
It's ingrained. I know when something is worth pursuing at this point because of that training. But I'll give an example today. I was mixing a record for an artist, and Tyler Johnson, producer, one of my best homies. I did 2 delay throws in a second verse, 1 pan to the left, 1 pan to the right, tried to do something symmetrical. And he was like, love the second one that, you know, takes us into the pre-chorus, but like don't love the first one. I was like, cool, mute the first one. Like there's no, you know, there's nothing personal about it. I think together they worked really well and it kept the momentum moving, but like it's not worse without the first one, so we're just gonna mute it. But no, I didn't set the rule, but I did know that like I put the Valhalla delay on, and if it's not a vibe right away and I know it's not tight, I'm just gonna not do it because it doesn't need it. The record didn't need it. But that's the training for sure.
Yeah, I feel like separating the ego from the creative process is like super key because the song needs to be whatever it needs to be. It doesn't matter who came up with it, how it was conceived. It's just it happened. You know, and that's a miracle, you know. So and you know, particularly, you know, in a room you'll have like a writer, you know, maybe two writers, maybe one person's super strong with lyrics, the other's great with melody, maybe they're both great with both, like whatever mix match of the two, you know, and hopefully you have a great singer in the room if it's a pitch song, if it's not an artist day, but you know, just like any way that you can inspire the room, whether it be like, you know, you're like noodling like a little melody on guitar or keyboard, or just like randomly throwing a different drum loop in there, and any way to keep things moving and different neurons firing off. Like you just got to keep the inspiration happening.
Sometimes it's doing nothing at all.
Yeah, we had Ryan Lewis on the podcast a couple weeks back, and one of my favorite takeaways was like who's controlling or directing the energy in the room at what time, and that can be transferring off and handed off to different people in the room, but like someone's got to be holding that energy and driving it forward.
That's the jazz.
Yeah,
definitely. It's important to, as a producer, specifically as a producer, right? Because you're tasked to like get the song over the finish line. If you're not driving at the beginning, let it be. Like, it's cool. It'll be your turn eventually over the course of this song to drive.
Oh, I love that. Like, take the back seat.
Happen.
Yeah.
If there's two writers that are, or a writer that on their own that are really like taking initiative and just they have a great idea and you have nothing to add, like, let it be. You're gonna have to finish the song.
It keeps.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna have to do it. Sorry.
It sounds to me like, you know, I've been in these, you know, writing sessions. I've written songs. I've worked on music, you know, for 20 years with people, longer. Almost 30. And
damn, bro, you old.
Started young.
Old flex.
The point is, it's like I'm hearing you guys talking about it, and it's like it's the first time I'm ever thinking about everyone in the room is inspiring each other all the time in these sessions, and that's kind of the job. And it's hard to describe. That's the way things happen, right? That's like the means. It's like we're all adjusting and adapting and learning, and you're saying these 200, 300 sessions in, and you sort of get confident, you get to trust, you know, yourself more deeply. And it's like we're in these rooms adapting and feeding each other, feeding off of each other, adapting to each other. And we're all in a state of trying to inspire each other the whole time. That's such a wild
tightrope walking, you know? It's like,
so you just, when we order food, like everything is just being optimized for that.
Yeah.
To empower each other, you know, it's an interesting idea.
I mean, we tend to think a lot about studios in that way. Like, how do you curate the best vibe studio for that reason? Like, who's ordering the food? Where are the coffee beans coming from? Like, every experience being optimal and non-invasive to the creative process would be ideal. I mean, coming from home studio circumstance, like I have full control over that. So when someone comes over, I can adjust the scent of the studio to whoever it's going to be. I can have the right wine for them. I can have, you know, we can do these things. It's different in major studios, but I think we all kind of think that way. Like there's writers for big writers and artists who show up for that reason. Like vibe is so important. And
definitely,
I think now more than ever, we actually have control.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep the protect everyone there from the things that would interrupt and disturb and have a negative impact.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like a whole other level of inspiration where, you know, as a host of these things, or as someone who's setting the stage for these sessions or setting the conditions, you can be inspired to, you know, surprise the singer within and out, or like whatever it is, to like, it's like being a really good friend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And trying to make people happy and
Fast
whatever.
friends.
So it's important to keep the technical game together so you don't get like computer problems, like fucking with the vibe and, you know, all that stuff, and all that shit's got to be handled. And then that protective layer, in effect, but you know, it's an additional layer to be like, what can I do to like raise, to elevate? You know? It's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's take a step out of the room. So we just talked a lot about the process and being in the room, and I kind of want to come back to that in some of your evolved process that I know we talked about off mic. But what's your relationship with feedback? Like, what, you know, the minute you have something that you think is tight, like what's a trusted source? Like what makes a trusted source for you to be like, we're going to play it to this person and that person, and we're going to take their feedback, whether it's with a grain of salt or actually full trust. You know, what's your relationship with that?
Again, it's like every situation is different. Like I feel like it depends. Like is it the artist saying it? Is it the junior A&R? Is it the manager? Is it your manager? You know, everybody's gonna have like a creative opinion. It's just a matter of how you're feeling about it, as well as like the chain of command that, you know, is going to approve this record. Like, you know, if they want the vocals a decibel louder and you're like, yo, they're already super loud, but it's coming from the president of the label, you know, we're going to be texting Castelli, yo, they're demanding the vocals up a decibel, and he's going to be like really annoyed about it and scoff, and then like go like print the mix with the decibel
Do it anyway.
vocal.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just like
Scoff.
Fight the battles that like you really think you need to fight because like they're worth it to you, but also just know that like, again, you're in the service industry. Some people want their steak well done. Like it might be like wrong, but they want it.
I think on the technical side of things, and like, you know, dealing with all the parties involved, that's definitely a factor. But I think creatively, right, you know, you as a producer that's doing their job properly, you know when something's good. It doesn't have to be your kind of good, right? Yeah, I know when there's a really good reggaeton song. I know when it's a really good trap song. I know when it's a really good classical song, jazz song, etc. Right? Doesn't mean I can do all that, but if the project that you're on, right, or the song that you're writing is something in your wheelhouse, but not necessarily your preferred thing, you know when it's good, right? And it's, I don't find too much of a need beyond the artist or the writer, whoever this is serving, to think that it's good also.
Yeah, it's literally like just navigating the way you feel about it against
it. But then there's the times where you're like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? That's rare.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen that often. And that goes back to the feeling that you got in your garage when you were, you know, however years old.
Yes.
And you made your first thing that you thought was awesome, which he listened back to and it really sucks. But you got really excited about that half coherent song. And that happens every once in a while, and that kind of makes everything magical. And it's like, how do you create a career or a working environment where you can have those moments as often as possible, right?
Yeah.
If I could have one every couple months, like, wow, I'm the happiest man in the world.
And also like what's wild is like again going back to letting things happen. sometimes you don't know. Like what one of our writer friends, who had this like huge song they wrote, a breakout hit for this artist. They were talking about the song. They were like, yeah, I absolutely hated that song when we did it. It was like we did it in 30 minutes. Like I had to leave to go to another session. I was just like literally like, like writing the most basic lyrics to get out the door, and like didn't think anything was going to happen with it. It was a Hail Mary. And it was this huge record. And I thought the song was great. Like, it sounded like well done and very personal and like intimate. Yeah. But they were not a fan. And it was a huge song for them. So they like, couldn't be mad. But it's one of those things where it's like, you just gotta like, so sometimes your instincts like that are truly 100% spot on, because like, they wrote a smash song in 30 minutes without even trying.
Not even being available to it, to recognize it for what it was.
Well, yeah,
it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Well, it's back to the Byron Katie thing of like, most of what you think is trash. Ignore it. It's the thoughts that are coming into your mind, they're rubbish.
Right. They're just thoughts.
They're just thoughts.
Just
they're clouds. They're just noise. That's not who you are. They're just thoughts. So maybe you're making a great song and your brain is like, I'm late. My wife is mad at me. I'm hungry. Yeah. I don't like the singer. She gave me a weird look.
But you've done enough reps where it can come out.
That's why I asked the question about the relationship to feedback, because that's going to happen, right? And someone else is going to say, no, this is tight. And you're going to say, no, I'm hungry. Like, and then that's why I was asking. Exactly.
But I think it's more so the relationship to feedback being like, when you don't know. Like there are some times where you make something which is technically good enough, right? It sounds good, it emotes something, but you're just kind of ambivalent about it, right? You've done your job, you've served the purpose, but maybe it's just not hitting you emotionally in a certain way, whether it's like the weather outside or how you feel that day, how your chemicals are kind of doing their thing. But I definitely have a good 2 or 3 people in my life that I know, okay, they like this kind of song. They exist in this place emotionally. Let me bounce this off of them.
Yeah.
I also feel like we're very picky. So more often than not, the disparity is that we don't like something, but somebody else really loves it and wants to put it out. And we're just kind of like,
we named an episode after salmon that John was so bent out of shape that he cooked badly. I had a great dinner. I had nice white wine and salmon, and John was just angry the whole dinner. Like, this salmon is fucking. I fucked us the salmon. This is bullshit. Everything is shit. I don't know why you guys come here.
I was so pissed.
He spent the whole of dinner beating himself up, and I'm just like, yeah, that's great, John. I'm just like chewing on a nice salmon. So we all like it's a human thing, right? Michael, you had something.
Yeah.
I'm curious. You're our first guests that are a duo, a team.
Nice.
And so that's awesome. A word
shout
for
out
you.
all the duos.
Shout out to the duos, the duets. I'm curious about your collaboration with each other. We're talking about collaboration with the artist, but in a way, I don't know how do you see yourselves as like one unit that's delivered to an artist and meets the artist, or is it very much like 2 independent people meeting the artist? Like, how do you think about your collaboration with each other, you and the artist? And start there.
I feel going anywhere. I feel weird going anywhere without this dude. So, it's like definitely like the idea of making music, I would feel like completely naked in the room.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as our collaboration goes, I feel like we do all sides of things. So we're very fluid in, starting ideas, finishing ideas that each other started. It's just like, again, kind of adapting to the ideas, because there's 2 different like types of currency in like producing music, at least to me. There's like, you have an idea, and you have the technical means of finishing or in some capacity contributing to an idea. So it's like, is it the actual like hours of like, you know, like blood, sweat, and tears of like chipping away at something, or is it like, oh, let's do something like this, here's a voice note I made in 15 seconds, like have fun like making it work over the next 5 hours. It's like, it's a balance of that and just like, oh, I think I can bring something to this idea in this way, or like, yo, I have a crazy idea and I think you would crush like doing this type of concept.
Sounds
And
like you're playing to each other's strengths, as they say.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it's sort of to expand upon that, you know, we typically fall into a flow once an idea, a baseline structure, and identity has been established, right? But I love that we can come, like he said, we can come to each other with a voice note or some chords or a sample or anything.
Song reference,
yeah,
like a tempo.
and in that sense, the hardest part to me of the creative process is that first 5% of like, this is something worth chasing. And that is completely free and open in every way. Like there's very few songs that have started the same way in our sort of collaboration.
And now you guys are obviously practiced at it, but there was a period of time where you weren't naturally. You met each other, you just started working together. What was there friction there? Was it like really seamless from the beginning?
Yeah. How did you find your way in?
Yeah. How did you work? I mean, even like day 1 to 30, you know, what was that looking like?
Basically, I was just terrible.
Same.
At what? At what exactly?
Every aspect of the everything.
Same.
Tons of potential.
I think we found our unity in both being terrible together.
Tons of potential. Let's not take that away.
Largely based on like the, you know, consoling each other. It's like, dude, like, it's okay, I'm lame too.
Well, if there was that much terrible, what did you hear in each other?
We had a lot of similarities in terms of our taste, our life experiences when it comes to certain things, our outlook, the kind of music that we were listening to, right? And just, you know, who we were as people at the time, and we were good enough. Like, you know, it doesn't take that much to get into certain rooms, right? And it's like you're good enough to get in there, right? It's like anybody can start a song, anybody can find themselves in a situation where you're contributing to something. But what really took the longest was, all right, let's both work on our skills and push each other so that we can compete.
Was that an actual conversation you had? Or was that something you came to?
I think that's one of the important things that we saw in each other. It's like, hey, look at this. Oh, amazing. Have you tried this? Have you seen this? We would feed each other, feed each other's ideas and keep thinking of, okay, this is where we are now. How do we get better? And even like this morning, right? We were talking about like, we have hundreds of amazing loops that we've just accumulated over the last months and years, right? How do we come up with a system where we can categorize everything with certain tags, key, tempo, etc.? And additionally,
I'm trying to make an app for our beats.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you want to do a collab, install our app, filter, however, you know.
Because sometimes you'll be in a creative situation where, oh man, that one loop from the other day, what's the name of it? Or where is it? Blah, blah, blah. Even if it's in the right folder, what'd you name it? What's the tempo, etc. So it's just like, how do you...
Yeah, it's hard to be like, Siri, play the beat that goes...
Isn't that SoundMiner? Are you describing SoundMiner?
Similar, yeah.
Yeah, that's what everyone uses on the trailer side. I do some trailer work.
Yeah. That's on the short list of figuring out a workflow for sure. But it's like not only on the tool side of things. It's like, hey man, like that last song we did is overcompressed. Like listen to these things. Like check out everything that has been coming out and maybe doing well, or that's been coming out that we really like. And it's like, what about our process is yielding something that is maybe a little dated or could be better, right? And it's it's both on an examining your skills on a like recurring basis, always trying to get better, but also examining what you did last week.
And it seems like you're doing it for each other, which I really love. Like this idea that you're looking to one another for that feedback and that education and learning, as well as in yourselves. Is that correct?
When we first met, I feel like the resource set available like online via like YouTube and stuff like that was like not even like a fraction of where it's at today. So definitely on a technical level of like understanding like synthesis, both like on like the actual like, oh, like what is an envelope, but also, oh, how do I make this sound more interesting or like more like screamy or like more soft, like, you know, all that stuff was definitely like in those early days of learning to produce for me, like not like something that I could just turn to Google or Reddit and find the answer for. And I feel like not all producer creative types get super technical, and both of us kind of do and have always been that way. So like that was definitely a point of like bonding as well, where it was like, all right, like you're like actually like aware of this, pay attention to it, and like are trying to understand it if you don't already understand it.
And what I'll add to that is if you're learning it on YouTube, it means it's popular enough for somebody that's not necessarily doing it professionally to teach you about it, right? So it's like, how do you come up with the next thing? How do you do your version of that? Because if it's on YouTube and 100,000 or 1 million people have seen it, it's not new anymore, or it's not fresh. It's not pushing the envelope.
That was my next observation, is that the access to this information, like the quality of record, seems to be inversely linked to it, right? The more info there is, the worse the general quality of records is. You know, the less inventive music we seem to be hearing, the less dangerous records. I wanted to like kind of summarize your duo in the like off the question that Michael asked, and sort of see if there's something there for people listening. So you guys initially had a kind of a chemistry, you know, there was just an initial spark or an excitement to be around each other that worked. The fact that you guys sort of were on the same place, I know you're being a little bit self-deprecating, but the fact that you both kind of considered yourself to be not great and were on the same place and had a similar growth curve, because I've definitely seen bands where it's like clearly the singer is on one arc and the drummer's on another, and it's like, and the label, you know, the manager puts their hand on the singer's shoulder and says, listen, we're going to need a real drummer if we're going to tour, you know, if we're going to get this support gig or whatever. So you guys had a similar growth arc that's still growing. You're still growing together in that same way, and then this sort of inspiring each other or cheerleading thing, this thing where you guys are sort of excited to share stuff with each other. I think that's definitely a dynamic for us. And we're a different kind of collaboration, but we're our threads are just always blowing up with check this, read this.
I have many people I have that relationship to.
Yeah.
It's just a sharing, inspiring thing.
Yeah. I don't, which is interesting.
Wow.
I don't.
Yeah, same.
There are people in my life
Wait,
for whom
you do
it's
or
a
you don't?
completely.
I don't.
Well,
No.
I feel like where you and I are kind of starting that recently, like at least on the engineering front of things and the sonic front and pushing boundaries there. Like, I mean, you've been a huge, both of you, but Raul for sure. Just like, yo, have you tried this thing yet? I've been doing this with it, you know. Try, and then like, have you listened to this? It sounds like this. This part of it reminds you of something that you do, but like, what if you did it like this instead? You know, like that. That's that level of kind of engineering camaraderie that I definitely don't have as well. Like with a lot of
It's
people,
tough
but it's more
because
creative.
That was
more
our life.
It's more thoughtful.
That was our life for
That
a
was our
while.
life for a while. Exactly. It's just like in the younger, like, you know, where I'm like 8 years older than you, I think at this point. Like that's a substantial gap in time where there's not that many younger producer engineers that I think even really care about the technical aspect that much and are being dangerously creative. It's like, as Rory would put it. I mean, you guys are stepping out places intentionally. And it just, I'm just glad we're beginning to have that in the last couple of years, and specifically this year.
It must be happening because in our conversations about your mixed stuff lately, like Roll's name keeps coming up.
Yeah.
In terms of this and that and this observation and that thing. And Rose said this to me. So it's like, you guys clearly have that.
Yeah.
I was sort of observing it in the more general sense, even just sharing podcasts or books or movies or songs. I don't really have...
My dad and I have this relationship.
I don't have that many two-way relationships. Quite often it's a one-way thing of me sharing stuff, but with us collectively, the four of us, it is a back and forth in that way.
Well, it's the only way to push, let's stay on the duo trend or what do we call us? Quadruples? Like what's it? We're a quad.
Quad.
A quad.
We're a band.
It's the only, it's the only way to push everyone forward. You have to align on certain outcomes. I mean, you don't have to agree with everything everyone presents, but you got to align on what the intention of the sending was. Like, why did you share that? I understand it. I don't agree with it, but I like it because of this. And I think it's rare. I don't actually think that's really fluid in the music scene at all. I don't,
Well, it's funny because we actually went to a writing camp, an amazing writing camp in Santorini. Shouts Emily Warren.
Yeah, shout out Emily Warren.
And
Amazing.
it was super incredible experience, but beautiful scenery and food aside, all the producers that were there for the camp were staying in a house together. And that was a super fun experience because, at the end of the day, we would share the songs with like the entire camp. Like we would play down like 5 songs or whatever.
Exactly.
Campfire
and then
shit.
Everybody's there. All the producers are sleeping there. So you're just like hanging out and you're like, yo, like that like plug sound in the verse was like really cool. How did you do that? And they were like, oh, you would just kind of share stuff. And I was like, this is wild. This is like the first time that like I've like in real time been like hanging out with a bunch of other people that do what I do, where we're not like actively working, but also like, there were like maybe like 10 producers or something like that. You would never have 10 producers on a session. So that opportunity to kind of have that like round table with like other like really incredible producers that you admire, like that's like a rare thing to happen because we're always like alone in rooms working by ourselves and then like go home and
Yeah.
It's so rare that we set up a format where we could do it with people. This is what the whole podcast is about, is having these kinds of high level conversations and connections with people like you guys. You know what I mean? This perspective. It's not. We live in a kind of increasingly atomized society. People are in their bubbles and their information bubbles and they're home and forget COVID. As an extra layer on top. So this community building project that Spider's been talking about so much lately, and this sort of just connecting around shared loves. Shared concepts that we respect or admire or want to be, want to live or whatever. It's super important.
Yeah, I mean, the first conversation we had with Mark and Raoul, the first time Rory and I were there together, we ended up on the roof, having a very deep and meaningful conversation. And it was, that, and I mean that day and that conversation with you guys specifically inspired a lot of this sort of community focus that we've been, it was each opportunity that we've had to go deep with people, you realize how much you need it, and how, and lately we've been talking about a kind of steady diet of this, like you need a steady diet of this togetherness, this sort of campfire way of ending the day, this way of bouncing things around and getting the best out of, the good people you choose to be around. I mean, this is what we are.
Yeah.
It's not optional.
Can I take things in a completely different direction?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Something that I'm kind of curious about and don't really understand a lot about, and I don't want you guys to do a sort of a primer or a 101, but I'm interested in your take on it. So, writing songs and producing, there are different ways to get paid. And I'm not asking you guys to tell me what your last, check was. I'm asking sort of generalized questions. So answer them however you want, right? But I'm thinking of a young producer, writer, who is coming up and thinking about sustaining themselves in LA. Like, right at the top, I've written down here, surviving in LA in your first couple of years is winning. If you can make rent in the first couple of years here or in New York, you're doing it right. And sustain yourself. So something that I'm super unclear about is producers and songwriters, like the idea of producer fees and how that relates to, a songwriter, you write a song alone or with someone and you have a share of the song, however that's broken up. So let's imagine you two guys are the sole writers of a song and it's 50-50. And you work that with you both have publishing deals. So the publishing company then get their cut of the royalties that the song generates. That's the most, right? Where do producer fees come into that when you are the songwriter and the producer? Is that a big part of the thing right now? Is that a big part of sustaining? Do young producers not get that at all and it only arrives later in the game? Are there people who are making more off producer fees than royalties after the fact?
Yeah, I mean, as I think a key thing is like you're a young person in today's game, right? Let's say I'm starting over, but now there's so many more options than there were 10 years ago, right? You can have a tight beat sort of situation on YouTube. You can stream yourself on Twitch making beats. You can sell beats online.
Splice
packs. The options are definitely more broad now, but in the traditional sort of industry game, right? You as a producer getting your fee, and then if you wrote it, you're additionally getting a share of the song, and if you have a pub deal, hopefully you're recouping that, and they're paying you something, and you're getting the share through the PRO, right? But as a young producer, I would take on, a few mixed projects here and there. I told myself I wouldn't do that until after I got my pub deal, right? Because you get your pub deal, that's kind of like your route. You can maybe put down enough to get a lease or something like that, and keep things moving. But it's nice to you have a couple days off. Take the right mix thing, because there's always a level for you that you're confident enough to play ball in on a service side of things. That's going to keep the lights on. But I think it's important to remember that there's a hustle to the whole thing, right? Like sometimes you play songs not because they're the best song ever, but you caught the right person at the right time with the right good enough song.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Is there a level at which people graduate into? So you're producing and you're not getting paid, and then there's a level where, where you start getting a producer fee, and producer fees are one-time deals. It's a one-time payment to produce a track, whether it comes out or not. Does that vary?
Generally, you're getting a producer fee if a song is going to come out.
Okay. Yeah.
If something ends up standing in the way of its release, after you do that agreement and it doesn't come out, you already got paid. Well, you already got paid, but otherwise it's not like obviously there's certain situations where you're getting a day rate to do a session, but you're not necessarily like signing like something going into it. Oh, like you must deliver X tracks and you're gonna get like paid, X amount, because it ultimately comes down to the product. Is what you did good? Is it something that the artist is going to use, or if it's something that you're pitching, is it something that an artist is going to take?
Right, and it's sort of like establishing that definition for yourself, right? If you're not, if you start off and you're not necessarily playing in the major label system or in the label system at all, right? It's less standard. So is the artist paying you directly out of their pocket? Are you establishing a protocol so that they don't run off with your song? Do you trust them? Is it the trust that's keeping you from, keeping you honest with each other? And it's being aware. It's the business side of the production thing that's sometimes equally as important. Not sometimes. I think it's a lot of the time equally as important as how good the song is. Because I know plenty of people that have the skills, they have the songs maybe just sitting on their drive, but without thinking, I can get so-and-so to play guitar on this or put drums on this, and it's gonna, maybe their manager is gonna hear it and they're connected to this person, that'll make that song end up with the right artist in the right place, right? Yeah.
That was going to be my next question, is sort of, at any point in your journey from the start to now, we were talking recently in one of our meetings about sort of, strategy, like figuring out what, like that exact move you just described of like, hey, if we get this song over here, this person, they might get their ears on it. It's strategic, it's thoughtful, it's creative, really. And then there's execution, which is like, chase that guy and get my fucking check. Like, that guy owes me money, get it. Like, just that simple. Or we need a fucking Mellotron on Tuesday here because the artist wants it. And like, someone is executing that. It isn't a creative thing. It isn't a vision thing. How do you guys, like, do you have both of those in your lives? Are you guys the creative visionary part and someone is in execution? Like, I was thinking about like what's working in your team. What do you wish you had more of without throwing anyone under the bus? Like, how do you think about that world? Because I know from when I was in Ireland, I had no idea what made the sounds that were coming out of the speakers. I just didn't know where they came from. I had no idea where the producer started and the engineer ended. I had no idea where the songwriter ended and the producer started. Right. I had no idea, was it the player or the instrument or the amp or the pedal or the plug-in after? Like, I just didn't know.
It's all of the above.
It's all of them. Of course it is. I'm here now. I know that, but I'm sort of going back to a time when I was a little more naive. And I think the same about the industry. Like, are you guys the visionaries for your own career in these creative moves? Or is someone coming to you with inventive things like, hey, I think if we got this song across this director's desk, then it could get synced in this movie on this day because his daughter likes this artist?
It's the same type of collaboration that the actual creative process is as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like,
interesting.
Everybody is constantly like brainstorming ideas of like, how to get songs places, how to, everything, because like, there's as much value in that side of the creative process as the actual like songwriting. I mean, that's why A&Rs exist. And there's definitely like a lot of like amazing A&Rs that we work with like as well that, will make moves like that, or like put us in the room with like artists that like we wouldn't have thought to work with, but the new project that they're working on that we haven't heard is like something that we would like crush. So like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of various situations, although I would say like there's been a few shifts over the past like year that have been very much so conscious decisions, but like in the midst of all that, like you're still going back and forth with your manager. Our lawyer's amazing, so is our manager, like
Shout out Scott and Geoff.
Nice.
But I think more specifically, right, there are gatekeepers or decision makers that are creative types that will execute on an idea and just kind of be a producer in a way, right? There's high level A&Rs and executives that will make songs happen as a producer would in like a traditional sense. But it's meeting them and letting them know what you're good at, how you can provide value to them. There's A&Rs and managers that have access to artists that you should get in contact with because maybe you have an idea for something and organically by playing it for them or showing it to somebody near them, it could spark the right idea that you also had, it's knowing the players and how you can provide the most value without being a pest.
That's like producing in a room. You don't tell the guitar player, play this and grab the guitar and show them the fingering. You sort of create a context where they have the idea that will work.
Yes.
Right.
Again, it's inspiring.
Yeah,
Again,
it's inspiring
coming
it
back
and
to it.
and giving them ownership. That's a creative process. There's nothing. I mean, I don't think of that as manipulative or dark. It's just part of being in a creative collaboration or enabling people to succeed. Right. It's there's nothing unusual or wrong in that. In my mind, it's just part of collaborating. We do it all the time when we're working in people's rooms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I find all that stuff fascinating.
I know we're kind of nearing our time with you guys, and I'm kind of, we have a bit left, but I'm kind of curious what, you've expressed to me off mic that your process is shifting, and you called me the other day to be like, what's like, who's next? What are we missing? Like who's gonna make the move, and who should we work with? I just trying to get some perspective on that, and I thought that was a really great call to get, because I'm thinking the same thing, and everyone I gets to that point at some point. Well, if they, I actually should add the privilege line, and like we're privileged to be at this level and working consistently at it already. But at some point you're like, okay, cool. What do I really want to touch? What do I really think that I'm good at and can bring my best to elevate the success level of this? And we all want to exist there most of the time, if not all the time. But where do you see that? Like, where have you been in the last 2 weeks since kind of we had that call? And what are you looking at for the rest of this year and like being excited to work on?
We're in the midst of an awesome project that's been super gratifying, super challenging, and forced us to really be checking ourselves at every step of the way, right? Is this the right way to do this? Are we the right people to do this specific thing? Because when like you said, you have the privilege sometimes to work on projects that don't have a deadline. Mm-hmm. It's just, it has to be the best thing that it can be, right? Mm-hmm. And there are no stones that you should leave unturned, right? Is this even the right harmony, right? Typically, you will come up with a song and it has an identity, and you're like, all right, that's the song. They're like, no, completely flip it. Put it down to just vocals. Is it even the right tempo? Restart. Go back. Are those the right drums? Take them off completely. So it's been
fearless
a really,
approach.
Yeah, it's been an amazing creative time in that sense, where don't get married to any specific part of the song because it can change at any moment.
Non-attachment.
It's more like a workshop of creative identity as opposed to like really any specific one thing. It's just like vision, basically.
So it's all journey and no destination until there's a destination.
Yes, it's like
until you arrive.
Yes, yeah,
and
you're
just
here.
there. You're like, oh, okay, cool.
We're here.
I feel really blessed to be in a situation where you are working on one or two projects that are ongoing. They're album projects. They're more long term. A song might exist in a completely raw, what would be deemed wrong form for a long time before you completely flip it. And you might know what it needs to be the whole time, but you just need to live with the version that sparked the idea.
Me too.
I love this shit.
That's deep.
For just long enough for you to be able to synthesize the perfect version for it. Not something that works, the perfect version of it. And I wish every project were like this. There would be so much amazing music out. But
patience is key.
There's usually like, oh, I'm the mastermind. This is the right idea. Throw it down. It's like, nah. You're trying to make a musical legacy. Yeah, you're trying to keep the lights on, right? But maybe you're lucky enough that you tick that box. You're like, I'm good for a while because, my process has gotten me to this point. I get to focus on, in addition to building a life for myself and those that I love, to build a musical legacy. It's like, wow, I didn't like you go in it for the love, right? And hopefully you can stick with it your entire career. Rarely happens, right? And if you're able to loop back around, that's like you did it. It's a cheat code. And when you get to that point, if you never lose it, you're a freak of nature. But when you get to that point, realize that it's like maybe the most important part of your life, and take it super seriously.
The very first question I had written down for tonight was, what does winning look like? And you just described it, of being in this, of being in this moment where you have the freedom to take the biggest risks. We talk all the time about doing dangerous work, about using systems so that we can go ever higher on the tightrope and take bigger risks, and using the fact that we can edit here to just say dumb shit and see where it goes, because it might be inspired or it might be dumb shit. That's amazing. And grabbing this moment, and you feel like you're in that right now.
Definitely, it's important because like in the beginning of it, you can take wild risks, and there's no downside for the most part, right? It's like, oh, maybe you have to go get a job, not doing what you wanted. You could just be wild. There's not as high of stakes, right? But the stakes get higher, and your livelihood depends on, it's like where the hell am I going to get a job? Like, I haven't had a job in 8 years. I'm not qualified to do anything that somebody trained would do, right? So the stakes are pretty high for me right now. I'm like an adult. I'm surviving off of music, right? There's an accepted commercial sound, if you want to call it that, right? You know when something is good enough to be commercially viable or at least releasable. And you might have an opportunity to take the steady thing versus the creatively gratifying, legacy building, maybe more risky version of that thing. But you got to make that decision, because no one's going to tell you, hey, that next project you're going to take, that's going to be the beginning of your downfall, right? Like you're going to fall off after that point, and certain habits and certain things that you're going to I guess solidify during that process are just going to take you down.
Yeah.
Because these careers aren't guaranteed. It's not like you have insurance.
Yeah, you're not a doctor who just keeps going and doing the same surgery over and over.
Yeah.
No tenured professor.
Different gig.
And I got to say, the pandemic was definitely a big part in amplifying the self-reflection that we constantly try to do.
Yeah. Same for us. Of just that, what are we really doing? I mean, we're going to the desert next month or this month to ask that question. What are we doing? What's the podcast for? What are we really doing? Not are we talking on mic, or what are we talking about? Like, what are we really, really doing underneath it all? Yeah. And I guess that's the question you guys are asking, is like, are we serving people? Are we making product, or are we fucking making art that's going to last forever? And it sounds to me like you're much closer to that end of the continuum right now, which is super exciting.
Hopefully, yeah. It feels that way, at least.
Well, I mean, I feel like what brings you into music is the art. So that's kind of like the like weird conundrum of like existing on the business side of things, is like you have what you love and your opinion, and then you have all these people that you're trying to make music for. So, you're kind of like Volta was saying, like ultimately, like if you play your cards right, able to circle back to do what you love for, in a business capacity, not just like for your own pleasure.
That's it.
And like ultimately as creatives, like that's, I feel like why we are like driven to this work, because we love to do it. So
a lot of people don't find their way back. We were talking with a mixer a couple of weeks ago on a workshop, and we were talking about this idea of copying other people's work and sort of cloning other people's styles, as you do when you're starting out trying to learn stuff. And the question we asked them was like, what if it works? What if you have success at this? Then what? Like you're the new copycat Serban for a minute, and then what? Like, where does it go? This thing.
I hope you have a hobby after that.
Yeah, because if you're not sort of building your own thing, your own voice, your own identity, it just can't be sustainable. I mean, I don't know. Maybe at certain times in the business there was probably a B grade Chris Lord-Alge for 10 years who got the other 9 tracks on the record and Chris missed a single. I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good place to be. Maybe that dude has a house in the valley and he's happy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know, it's not the thing that we got excited about when we were 15 or 16 about making
Definitely
records
not.
and that kind of crazy elevated play that we were doing, you know. Yeah.
But honestly, that enthusiasm that just came from the both of you was fantastic. And honestly, like I'm right there with you. I'm constantly trying to shake things up and like let people hear their records in a different way if they possibly can. And you know, a bunch of times it's a miss because it's like, oh, it's not like what it was, and that's fine. And I came to that conclusion 2 years ago. It's like, if it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out. But a theme that, you know, Rory and I come back to a lot is, you know, as a mixer, I keep mixing and he keeps mastering. It sounds like the same song over and over again. And every time I get an OjiVolta record on the desk, man, it's just a whole different experience. It's always, what can this be? It's always, this is something I've never heard. There's a sound choice in there. There's a design to a basic synth, a drum. The melody is you know, there's just something unique about it, and it always inspires me to go further. So I look forward to that collaboration in the future because there's something special going on.
Well, you'll probably get stems in a couple of days for another song.
Thank you, John.
Love that.
That means a lot. That means a lot. And I think it reflects on. I feel like it takes at least me a little while to really lock somebody into your confidence circle, right? And I'm glad that it is a two-way street where it's like, hey man, try this on your master bus. You know, what about this plugin on the vocal? And we're having those exchanges because, you know, you always hear about the producers and the engineer kind of fusing into one. Mm-hmm. And that's how the great songs get made.
Yeah. That's how the ones that stand the test of time get made, at least.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's what I want to do.
Hell yeah. Yo, let's close on that. You guys are great. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, dude.
Appreciate you.
It was
Appreciate
awesome.
you guys. Yeah,
Thanks,
it was fun.
Watch this not have recorded.
Conversations is produced and mixed by Dylan Seals. The Conversations theme was performed and recorded by the Hazelrigg brothers.
It recorded.
All right. Good job. I think you have a future
Good job,
in the business.
Ableton.